Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody. Big tech is back in the news. It's misbehaving again. Earlier this week we did a show with Beth Ann Patrick, the literary critic, on a new book about Facebook called Careless People, a cautionary tale of power, greed, and lost idealism. Shouldn't have come, I guess, as a great surprise to most of us. We all knew that Facebook was a rather rotten company. One of the reasons we knew it was because the Wall Street Journal ran an excellent series on Facebook called The Facebook Files, which exposed the problems with the Facebook platform. And one of the contributors to the Facebook Files was my guest today, Keach Hagey, who is a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. And Keach has a new book coming out. It's coming out in a couple of months. It's on another bad boy of tech, or maybe a potentially bad boy of tech, Sam Altman. The book is called The Optimist. And earlier this week, the Wall Street Journal ran a piece, a teaser about the book, The Secrets and Misdirection Behind Sam Altman's Firing, which also went under the title of The Real Story Behind Sam Altman's Firing from OpenAI. And I'm thrilled that Keach is joining us from her home in Westchester, New York. Congratulations, Keach, on the new book. It's coming out in May. So I hope people will order the book from this conversation. I mentioned that you were one of the reporters on the journal team for the Facebook Files. Are there connections in your mind between the work you're doing on Altman and the work you did on Facebook? Are those two quite different kinds of projects?
Well, there is some connection. I would say one of the connections, I'm actually a media reporter traditionally, and I think we've seen both Facebook and AI have taken a pretty challenging approach to the media in general, especially when it comes to the copyright question. So I was actually first drawn to the topic of AI because of this copyright question. ChatGPT comes out, and my first question is, well, what was it trained on? And that answer is still playing out.
In other words, are you suggesting, Keach, I know that the Murdochs, the owners of the journal, have always been concerned about this, that AI is stealing most of its content?
Well, we have a lot of lawsuits that are in the courts right now that will determine whether or not it's really fair use under copyright law to take content and use it for AI training. But you've heard artists of all stripes object to it. So the artists themselves, have some feelings about that. Yeah, I mean, that was sort of the initial idea that made me interested in wanting to dig in.
So you've written this book, The Optimist, Sam Altman, OpenAI, and the Race to Invent the Future. Another book about another book about Sam Altman actually won the Financial Times Book of the Year last year by Palmy Olson. She was on the book on the show a couple of times, called Supremacy, and it's about Altman's race, I guess, with Google's Demis Hassabis. Yours is the first biography of Altman. How would you summarize Altman? I had the cheek to begin this describing him or hinting that he was a bad boy. Is that a fair way to begin our discussion about Sam Altman?
I don't know if it totally is, although, from his life, he's always loved speed. So even when he was in high school, he loved fast cars. He would freak out his friends by driving too fast. And I think that's a theme we've seen throughout his whole career, through his time atop Y Combinator, when he really was like the king of the startup ecosystem of Silicon Valley. through OpenAI. I mean, that the whole fight about safety is really a fight about speed. How fast should we go toward this new future? And Sam, the way to understand Sam is that he is really an investor. His superpower is being able to sell an investor and really like a startup ecosystem wizard. He can sell a room full of people on a vision of what is going to happen in the future like no other person. And this makes people open their wallets and fund his projects. And this is really why he has won this AI race so far, because the version of AI that has come to the forefront needs piles and piles of money, and that's what Sam is good at assembling.
In other words, he's the kind of guy who could sell sand to the Saudis or ice to the Greenlanders.
Yes, well, ice, exactly.
I don't want to be rude about either the Saudis or the Greenlanders, but that's is that Sam's super skill? Is that what you think? If there's one thing that distinguishes him from everyone else, it's his sales skills.
100%, yes. And in fact, the can sell ice to people in northern climates. That was an exact quote that was told to me by one of the very first people that ever backed him. So the book is just full of like scene after scene of him going into these meetings of people who were often twice his age because he started so young. He was, a college sophomore when he was first funded by Sequoia. So he was incredibly young and so well-spoken and so convincing to these people that he could really see the future.
I always describe those types of people as after you talk to them, you need to check your pockets. You mentioned Y Combinator. And when the scandal, and we're going to talk more about the scandal of his dismissal as CEO of OpenAI and then his reappointment came along, there was some conversations with Paul Graham, who many years ago was on the show, came over to my home in Berkeley, probably 15 years ago. There were conversations with Paul Graham that suggested that Altman left with some bad blood between them. In terms of your research on Altman, is there broadly bad blood in the industry with many people who have dealt with him over the years? So
you will find a fair number of people, sure, who will speak ill of him, but not on the record, right?
What do you mean not? You mean they won't give their name, but they'll tell you it privately and tell you not to associate their name with him? Sure. Are they scared of him? Is that the reason?
Correct. You'll find that. I will say objectively, though, that is not the majority. That you will find more people for whom he has done favors that he didn't have to do. Because that's what he's very responsive. So if you email him or text him, he will figure out a way to help you if he can. And that has made him very, very powerful. And one of the things Paul Graham said about Sam is extremely good at becoming powerful.
Which is Paul Graham's way of insulting him, I think, isn't it?
I do think that he meant that as sort of like a snarky comment, but it's also it's objectively true. Paul's a pretty incisive thinker.
Yeah, although not as incisive as Sam, certainly not as rich as Sam. Keach, how much time for this book did you get with Altman? Did he sit down with you?
He did. We sat down for a number of interviews, spent many hours with him. He was frankly reluctant, as the book makes clear. He really wasn't happy that we were doing the book, and
he's not happy.
He wasn't initially, because this was not something that I asked for permission for in advance. It's an independent work of journalism, so he was not thrilled. He did not want a biography written about him at all. He said it was too soon. He thought it was not fair for the whole story to be about him.
Maybe he could have got Walter Isaacson to write it when he gets seriously rich.
Yeah. The idea did cross my mind.
Not that I'm being bitchy here, Keach, of course.
So yeah, he wasn't thrilled, but I kept reporting because, as I say in the book, my last book was about Sumner Redstone, who was nearly in a vegetative state when I.
Which the book got very good reviews.
Yeah, thank you. So I wasn't daunted by that, so I just kept making calls, and eventually, he sat down with me a few times.
So when you sat down with him, were you a bit wary, given that you knew that he was a charmer, that he could sell ice to the Greenlanders or heat to the Saudis?
Sure. I mean, as I write in the book, like he'll greet you with a hug. He's a nice person. He's a charming person, and that's I'm upfront about that. There are a lot of good parts about his personality, but there are also people that felt betrayed by him, and it kind of led to some of the chaos that we've seen in the company.
The book is about mostly, I mean, he had, as you said, he had a remarkable career even before OpenAI. And I know that your piece, your teaser in the journal deals with his relationship with Peter Thiel, which existed before OpenAI. Before we get to the OpenAI questions, what are the real questions about Sam before OpenAI that are controversial or unanswered and perhaps still uncertain in your mind? Is it the Y Combinator story?
Well, I think there are a couple. Most people, I would agree, are curious about the circumstances under which he left Y Combinator. There was really never any sense that there was anything amiss there until OpenAI blew up, and the journal did some reporting and others that he left under pressure. Let's say.
For people listening to this, you have to look at the half grin on Keach's face to know that there's more to it than we think.
Well, it's funny because we've reported like a whole thing about what was he fired, was he not fired, and Paul Graham gave us this quote that's like, we asked him to leave and he agreed immediately. So,
so basically, then he was fired. I mean, what was he going to say? Say no? But his boss told him to leave.
Right.
Why was he fired? And I'm using that word, maybe you won't agree, but why did Paul Graham ask him to leave?
Sure. So his attention had drifted a lot away from Y Combinator. So, a little, I'm sure your listeners all know, but right, Paul Graham created Y Combinator. It was his baby. He and Jessica Livingston, it was their child.
Yeah.
And they bequeathed it to Sam in 2014 to run, and kind of went off and retired. And Sam has a million ideas every day, and he spun up a bunch of them and kind of went running in a bunch of different directions and became kind of obsessed with this pet project of his, which turned out to become OpenAI. He launched a totally labyrinthine structure of things, YC Research, which was a nonprofit arm of Y Combinator that was funded separately, that was kind of his little world, that OpenAI was one of its projects. And he basically wasn't spending enough time doing Y Combinator and was doing OpenAI too much. And when that got back to Paul and Jessica, made him really mad.
One of the stories I heard that pissed off Paul and Jessica was that he was essentially wearing more than one hat, and this seems to be a feature of his life, wearing more than one hat at a time. In other words, a lot of the stuff he was doing at OpenAI was benefiting other companies he was somehow involved with. Is there any truth to that?
Well, are you talking about like the data, like using Y Combinator companies' data to train? I mean, they did use Y Combinator companies' data to train. I mean, Reddit was a key tool, right, for early OpenAI training. And of course, they dangled Y Combinator equity to attract these researchers, which was kind of one of the more wild things. As we've seen this lawsuit between Elon Musk and Sam Altman sort of spill more and more of these internal emails into the public domain, you see Sam, saying like, "Hey, Elon, like let's entice people to come work at this nonprofit. We can't pay them market rate, but maybe we can give them some YC equity," which is like an interesting structure, and you could see how that might be upsetting, especially if it seemed like it was siphoning off energy from YC.
So, Keach, tell us the story of OpenAI, because it was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it was co-founded by Elon Musk, who later fell out, I think, with OpenAI as well as with Sam Altman. Reid Hoffman, one of Silicon Valley's more ubiquitous figures, who's been on this show many times, was also involved. When was it founded, and when did Altman become involved?
It was founded in 2015, at the very end of 2015. But really throughout that whole year, Sam and Elon were having dinners, kind of discussing these apocalyptic visions of how rogue AI was a threat to humanity. If you look at sort of like what Elon was tweeting around this time, both Sam and Elon actually were very influenced by this book, Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom.
Yeah, about, was it paperclips taking over the world?
Right, which is actually an idea he took from Eliezer Yudkowsky. But yes, it was like the first time that this idea of AI as a threat to the humanity's existence got kind of widespread popular support.
Although, as you know, or certainly in the marketing for your book, Altman has he could be a character in an Asimov or Neil Stephenson story. Neil Stephenson was actually on the show a couple of years ago. Wow. And classic AI, classic science fiction writers have been warning about the dangers of AI ever since science fiction has existed.
Well, that's what's so fascinating about my reporting for this story. I was not expecting this, just how large a role science fiction played in making OpenAI a reality. So if you trace the thread all the way back, it really starts with Eliezer Yudkowsky and this listserv of the extropians. I don't know if you know who the extropians are, but they're sort of...
No, I mean, I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Right. So extropy is the opposite of entropy, right? So
yeah.
they wanted to fight chaos and death. So it was all these people who wanted to have their heads frozen and live forever. And we're on this email list coming out of the Bay Area in the 90s. And Eliezer Yudkowsky sort of became prominent in this community and got an institute founded. And he got together at some point with Peter Thiel, who then funded another institute called the Singularity Institute, named for some of the ideas that came out of science. Yeah, Ray Kurzweil, but also Werner Vinge.
Another character has been on the show.
Yeah. In fact, Ray Kurzweil was involved in all of this. So, and Werner Vinge would come and talk at the Singularity Institute things. And he was a science fiction writer who wrote about this idea of the singularity. So these science fiction ideas were there sort of pushing this whole thing forward and pushing the money forward long before the science caught up. So I thought that was so interesting that, fiction was like the vessel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you heard, there's an interesting conversation between Andrew Sullivan and Nick Denton on the Sullivan podcast. And Denton also comes along, one of the influential figures in Silicon Valley, who was actually destroyed by Thiel, the owner of Gawker, who also grew up with this obsession with science fiction. So was Altman always just a science fiction nerd when he was growing up too?
He was. He liked to read science fiction, Asimov, all of that. And he was really into science itself. So he likes to read scientific papers and was like coding in high school and stuff. So he was also like computer science, but he was a science fiction nerd.
It's ironic, Keach, that you call your book The Optimist, Sam Altman, OpenAI, and the Race to Invent the Future. But as you know, OpenAI was the product not of optimism, but of the pessimism of Musk and maybe Altman at the time about the destructive consequences of AI. I'm sure that is one of the contradictions, the paradoxes driving your narrative in the book.
It absolutely is. And it's fascinating to watch how OpenAI, which was ostensibly founded out of this fear, especially a fear that Google was going to be the entity that was going to control AI, then became this accelerating force. And you can kind of trace through Sam's writing the whole time that he really believes that technology is a force for good and that there's no good reason it can't deliver us into like a techno-utopia in the future. So while his thinking really mirrored Thiel's in like the 2014-ish area, complaining about tech stagnation and isn't it terrible that we were promised jetpacks and we only got Twitter.
What is it? We were promised flying cars and all we got was 140 characters and Kara Swisher. I bet they blamed Kara Swisher for this too.
Yeah. So he was, he was very caught up in that moment, but Sam has always had this techno-utopian narrative that has powered him through his whole career.
Keach, these characters, all these Silicon Valley, and they're mostly boys, or there's some girls, as your thing, your Wall Street Journal piece features. There seems to be sort of two ways of interpreting. On the one hand, these are all basically stuntedly developed 8-year-old still obsessed with science fiction and Lord of the Rings. That's always been in my interpretation of people like Thiel and Musk. And on the other hand, they were having this big, serious discussion, this civilizational discussion about how AI was going to change the world. You note that they feared Google, but my understanding was that Musk, for example, was driven by a row he had with Larry Page at some Silicon Valley party about AI. So let me rephrase that question. How much of this is seriously intellectual as opposed to basically adolescent boys who have read too much science fiction, fantasizing and personalizing all this nonsense?
I mean, it's a fair point. I do feel like they all sort of seem to like spin each other up a little bit. You know, they get together and they spin each other up into ever more apocalyptic scenarios. You're right about that meeting between Larry Page and Elon Musk. There's another, famous meeting between Elon Musk and Demis Hassabis, where they both said, "Oh, I'm working on the most important thing in the world," and Elon was like, "Well, I'm going to, take us to Mars." And Demis Hassabis is like, "Well, my AI could, my rogue AI could follow you to Mars.
My AI could beat your AI, right?"
Right. So is this a measuring contest? A little bit, probably.
A boys measuring contest, Keach, right? Yes. So going back to this 2015 moment, you mentioned Thiel and this meeting at a extremely expensive Japanese restaurant with Altman and Thiel. And Musk. Thiel, of course, and Musk were both also involved in PayPal. My understanding is they don't particularly like each other, or I don't think they really like anyone except themselves. Who was more important in the foundation of OpenAI? I mean, in terms of these three, was there a single person driving it? Hoffman was there too. Who was the real driver of this thing?
You're asking between Sam Altman and Elon Musk.
I mean, they were all there at the foundation. I mean, I guess they all claim ownership. Certainly, Musk does in all these legal cases he's taking now against OpenAI.
Well, basically, Sam had the idea and Elon had the money. So you can see from the emails that have come out in the lawsuit that Sam is the one actively pitching this structure. Oh, maybe we'll do a nonprofit. Maybe it'll be a lab. Maybe it'll be structured this way. Because that is one of the things that Sam is constantly doing. He's constantly thinking of like solutions and scenarios and sort of financial structures to do things, especially novel ones. So the idea for how to do this was Sam's. But another really important character is Greg Brockman, who was Sam's co-founder, who actually assembled all the people throughout the year of 2015 and remains at the company to this day. Because it's important to remember that both Sam Altman and Elon Musk had day jobs, or in Elon's case, many, many day jobs when they co-founded OpenAI. So they were there to be chairman, but they weren't there to do the day-to-day. That was really Greg Brockman and Ilya Sutskever, the chief scientist, who are both co-founders as well.
Yeah, and they were all involved. We're going to get to the big scandal in a second. So what about Thiel? You write in your Wall Street Journal piece about this dinner that Thiel and Altman have, and you present Altman as one of Thiel's boys in the sense that he saw his genius. Why didn't he just go to Thiel? I mean, Thiel at that point had as much money as Musk.
Yeah, so Thiel did invest in OpenAI, both when it was a nonprofit and then later on, like it had a for-profit arm. So he's been an investor the whole time. But you're right that he wasn't like the big underwriter. That Musk at one point said, if we need to say $1 billion at the outset, right? Or else no one's going to pay attention. And if the money doesn't come through, I'll cover it, is what Elon basically said. So it's a good question as to why Thiel couldn't have covered the whole thing, but he was in there, and Thiel's never been like a huge AI believer. He's been fascinated by it, but I'm not sure he's quite the believer.
So in this expensive dinner in LA's Art District in November 2023, do you report that Thiel was warning Altman off Musk because he was some sort of psychopath?
No. So what Peter Thiel is warning Sam Altman about a week before Sam got fired is that this idea of effective altruism or AI safety, or what Peter Thiel refers to it as Eliezer, meaning Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is
Yeah.
a very influential blogger of the rationalist community, who Thiel himself had funded and sort of created, and who then kind of turned and became a big-time AI doomer, and had just written some essay in Time saying, AI is going to kill us all if we don't stop. Thiel was warning Altman that this sort of AI poses an existential risk to humanity narrative was going to destroy OpenAI because it was so pervasive inside the company. Because, as you point out, the company had been founded based on this idea, right?
Isn't that kind of obvious? Why did it take Peter Thiel to need to take? I mean, sometimes with these people like Thiel and Musk, they're saying such obvious things that a 5-year-old could grasp. Why is it even worth reporting?
Well, I think that what's interesting is how Sam shrugs it off. So, Peter had warned Sam repeatedly that this AI safety community, really the effective altruism community, was a risk to OpenAI as it was going forward and trying to become a more commercial enterprise. And Sam's view was, look, I've overcome this several times in the past. Elon was kind of a doomer, and in the power struggle, I won. And Anthropic people, there was a famous split.
And the Anthropic people. Yeah.
Inside OpenAI in late 2020, about a dozen people from OpenAI went and created Anthropic over various issues, including, we want to create safer products, but also like a little loss of trust in Altman. But in both cases, like Sam prevailed. So he's thinking, all right, so maybe there's some voices of, effective altruism that are loud inside the company, but like I've beaten this before. What do I really need to worry about? And the great irony is, like, as that was happening, literally at that moment, the board, which was the board of people outside of him and his allies, which was basically half made up of people with ties to the effective altruism community, were having secret video calls about firing him right then. So in a way, Peter was right.
And I apologize, Keach, for the dimness of this question, but I still don't quite understand the narrative. You've got Sam Altman. You said it was his idea. He's a believer. He's an optimist in AI, changing the world, making the world a better place. He goes to Elon Musk, who's the ultimate doomer, who believes that AI is about to destroy humanity. How does that even work? What did he sell Musk? How did he get the $1 billion from Musk, or how much money he got? The more you talk about him, the more it sounds as if he has a little bit of the J.D. Vance in him, that what he says reflects perhaps what people want to hear.
That is one of the criticisms that I've heard in my reporting. The answer to your question is pretty interesting, actually. He first pitched Elon on, let's write an open letter together calling for the need for AI regulation. That was their first proposed project together. In fact, they did it, and it came out. And this was back in the time of the Obama administration. So the idea that, like, the first thing we're going to do is like slow down AI that doesn't even really, exist yet in the way that we understand it. Was pretty fascinating. And then once they started talking about, hey, we're going to write this letter together, maybe we should found a lab to counteract Google. And if it hadn't been for Elon and Sam both had this like unique insight into what was going on inside Google, which of course had bought DeepMind, which was really at the forefront of AI at that time. Peter Thiel was an investor as well. I feel like if it had not been for what DeepMind was doing, there would be no OpenAI, because it was their fear of what DeepMind was up to that prompted people to pony up.
Yeah, and to add some narrative complexity, I mean, this could have been written by Shakespeare or something. When OpenAI was founded, as you say, it was and even have a lab. It had no technology. Google was developing the technology. One of the white papers that came out of Google was on generative AI, which they didn't pursue. And then somehow OpenAI took the bet on generative AI, which is why we're here now. Is that a fair narrative summary?
Well, in my reporting, it's a little bit different in that in the beginning, DeepMind was there are many different kinds of AI going on inside Google, to be fair, right? And then Google buys DeepMind. But DeepMind was pursuing a very specific form of AI, like an agent, right? An agent that would play video games. And it made a big splash. Remember when it played Go and beat a human? And originally, OpenAI was set up to, as one of the researchers there said, copy paste DeepMind, right? They were just going to copy whatever DeepMind was doing, and so they did. They did a video game with a bot that could beat a human, Dota 2. And that was what Elon wanted to do. He wanted to sort of follow the DeepMind model. And it was only because OpenAI allowed its researchers sort of wide latitude to pursue a lot of different ideas that this one researcher, Alec Radford, sort of discovered what we now understand to be like LLMs.
Right, and that's out of Toronto, right?
Alec, he came from a different college. Ilya came from Toronto, as did Jeff Hinton. So Toronto is like a huge.
But this was sort of bound up with the Hinton group that.
Yes, and so then Ilya
had acquired, and then Hinton left Google.
Exactly. So Ilya Sutskever, who is the chief scientist, he had been at Google and he was at Toronto with Hinton, and he instantly sort of understood the power of what this researcher Alec Radford was doing. He was feeding Amazon reviews into a model, right, and realizing that it could tell you whether they were positive or negative, sentiment analysis, even though he didn't train it to do that. So it was a sense that language was something special. And if you forget about video games and pixels, if you focus on language, that there's kind of more than the sum of its parts could come out.
Yeah, and it's, again, probably will require a Shakespeare to finally tell this story. It's ironic that these young men who were so bad with language, who are so inarticulate, and however brilliant they are on the business front, like Elon Musk or even Thiel, they're the ones who fell on this large language model to revolutionize the world. Would it be fair to say, Keach, that the great achievement of Altman at OpenAI was to take the bet on LLMs? I mean, someone made the decision that we're going to go for this, that this offers some potential. Is that what Altman achieved partially at OpenAI?
I think that's exactly right. And your phrasing is exactly right. Take the bet. So Altman had been a poker player in college and loves poker and thinks it has great lessons for business. And when you talk to people, they said the thing that's special about Sam is he's the only person that they know who will, if there's a 1 in a million chance of something working, but if it works, it's going to like really, really work, he'll take it. So there are not that many people who can stomach that kind of risk, but Sam is sort of unusual in that way. So yes, he took the bet.
And one other person, of course, who comes to mind is our friend Elon Musk, who took a $40 billion bet on Twitter, which is now X, and everyone thought he was a complete moron, and now he's the one laughing. Was that one of the reasons why Altman and Musk fell out, that in some ways they're just too similar?
It's a good question. I don't find them similar in personality. Sam is generally, he can have flashes of anger, but he generally is calm and runs pretty cool. And of course, we all know that Elon does not. And you can see this in the correspondence, right? I mean, he would have these emails to the folks at OpenAI that's like, you're completely doomed. We have absolutely no hope of beating Google. We should all just stop now. That just, spoke to very sharp emotional ups and downs that you don't really see so much with him.
So I take your point on that. Although they both have the balls, I guess, to take the bet. I mean, to risk everything on a hunch. So when did Musk pick up his marbles and storm off on OpenAI?
So that was officially in 2018. In February 2018, there was a meeting where they were like, Elon's going to part ways. They said at the time it was because it was a conflict of interest because he was going to pursue AI at Tesla. But really, there'd been months of negotiations leading up to that. And it was really like the real pressure point was that they realized they were going to need a lot more money than they thought they were going to need. And they were struggling with, are we going to be a for-profit? Are we going to be a nonprofit? And of course, if they were going to transform into some kind of for-profit, who was going to run it? They needed a CEO. And so there are these emails about, well, who's going to be CEO? And fascinatingly, who was left to decide this was Greg Brockman and Ilya Sutskever, because they were the ones who were really running the company. And they were kind of weighing, oh, should it be Sam? Should it be Elon? And you see them sort of saying good and bad things about both of them. But in the book, I say really what happened was that originally, actually, they were leaning toward Elon. Greg was leaning toward Elon, and Sam kind of called him up and it's like, well, what are you doing? you're my best friend. Like, well, don't betray me. And he switched, and he convinced Ilya to switch with him, and then Sam won the power struggle.
So essentially, Musk was. Altman got chosen by Ilya and Greg Brockman to become CEO of OpenAI over Musk, and then Musk stormed off. And was this before it was obvious? This was before ChatGPT 3. Was this before it was obvious that they had made this remarkable breakthrough with LLMs?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in some ways, they were still just like sort of stumbling around in the wilderness. They had made some breakthroughs in that, Doda did beat a human. So that was, I'm thinking when that was like fall of 2017. So they knew that putting more compute behind these models was the trick. There was some sense that this like scaling model thing was the future, but they didn't really know, and they certainly didn't know what was the right path, what was the LLM path. So you're right that they didn't even understand really what was at stake yet.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of these classic Silicon Valley mini dramas, which seem interesting in a way inside, although some people might think, well, who cares? I mean, it's like two bald men fighting over a comb. Altman wins, he becomes CEO. Musk storms off, but at the time, there was no value in OpenAI. Then, of course, you have this ChatGPT breakthrough. How does that change everything? Both Musk's thinking, Sam's involvement, and the nature of the company. And, of course, this fundamental contradiction at the heart of the company between for-profit and non-profit.
Well, ChatGPT was a sensation, and it really changed everything. In November 2022, it was the fastest growing consumer app of all time, and it really was a surprise to the people inside the company how viral it went. And it did change everything. You'll notice that after only a few months after ChatGPT came out, we see Elon saying, well, I'm going to start an AI company too, a rival AI company. So whatever fears there were about pushing forward AI, right? I mean, here we are. It really started a race. It started an arms race that Google joined, Elon joined, and others have joined. And of course, the great irony is that in OpenAI's charter, it says, we are here to avoid a race. In fact, if there's a race and someone else gets there first, we'll hand them our tech, we'll join in and we'll help them. They were so afraid of a race, but they started a race. And that
irony upon ironies. And then maybe in terms of the main character in your book, Sam Altman, the ultimate irony is you noted earlier that his godlike skill is sales, is selling anything to anyone, and some people don't trust him. But suddenly here you had the greatest salesman in the world, and the greatest product in the world fell into his hands. Almost accidentally. I mean, he wasn't the one really. I mean, he took the bet, but it's sort of oddly ironic, isn't it?
Well, it's funny, right? I've thought a little bit about this question. They went after Ilya Sutskever, who was really the visionary, quite purposefully. And he was the one who you saw the Google paper of Transformer that was like the sort of key that unlocked the whole thing. Sort of the second piece is Alec Radford's idea of an LLM plus this idea of the Transformer that really did it. But if there had been no Ilya, it wouldn't have worked. And they knew enough, so they really had to go after him and really woo him. And that's the thing, right? Like Sam is really good at wooing people, and as was Greg. So I don't think it's completely random in that he's good at attracting.
Yeah, well, he wouldn't. I mean, knowing Sam, he wouldn't have hung around if there was no value there. So you've mentioned Greg Brockman, the number 2 guy, and then Ilya Sutskever, the computer scientist who was probably the bridge between OpenAI and Hinton and the Google research group. At what point, Keach, did Altman's position at OpenAI become so tenuous? You talk in your Wall Street Journal piece about this dinner between Thiel and Altman, in which Thiel is warning him about the fundamental contradiction of the company. The image in the Wall Street Journal is of Sam Altman with a plate of noodles looking very innocent, but I can't imagine Sam Altman ever really being innocent. Did he know what was happening in terms of this contradiction?
Well, he knew that there were loud voices of effective altruism in the company, and they were causing a lot of strain. But no, he had no idea the plotting that was going on.
But why? But before we get to that plotting, my point is that what Thiel told him couldn't have been particularly, I mean, Sam Altman, you may not like him, but he's an incredibly smart guy. I mean, none of this would have been news to him that Peter Thiel was telling him. I mean, he'd been doing this for 4 or 5 years.
Sure. And, Sam describes there being 3 tribes in OpenAI, right? There's a safety tribe, a research tribe, and like a policy tribe. And these are kind of not, they don't just have different jobs, but they kind of come from different social worlds and milieus and read different blogs. And, the AI safety world, which is very influenced by rationalism and effective altruism, is its own kind of universe that was very ascendant at that time and had an ungodly amount of money being poured into it.
Yeah, and of course we had Sam Bankman. I mean, I don't know if they all knew each other, but Sam Bankman-Fried, of course, was literally banking a lot of the effective altruist movement, some of it obviously illegally, which is why he's in jail now.
Yep. But not just him. It was, open philanthropy was spending tens of millions of dollars. And Jan Tallinn, was also spending.
Yeah, I know Tallinn, and interesting. I mean, maybe there's a book in this too. Oxford seems to be central in this narrative. Yep. The skeptical book on AI came out of Oxford, and then the effective Toby Ord and the effective altruism movement was also born there. So, coming to this huge story about Altman's firing at OpenAI, what in your mind? I mean, what are you revealing that we didn't already know? I mean, my understanding as a generalist was they were all nervous about Sam, that they didn't trust the guy, and they pushed him out, and then he sort of launched a counteroffensive and pushed some of them out. I mean, what are you saying in The Optimist that we don't already know?
Well, one of the things I think people did not understand was the role that Mira Murati played, which she was
another character, one of the few women in all this.
Yeah, she's a CTO of OpenAI, and plays kind of a fascinating role at the very center of the whole thing. But the other thing is that just how long in the making this firing was. So there were, as sometimes described to me, there were long-term reasons and short-term reasons why Sam was fired. And the long-term reasons have never really been understood, but that there was this board deadlock for a year leading up to it, that have been all these safety breaches, small ones, but leading up to the firing, and that this startup fund that people knew about. By the time that the firing happened, it was known that Sam Altman owned OpenAI startup fund himself, even though he had been going around saying, "I own no equity in OpenAI." And they changed that after it was revealed in the press.
In other words, he was lying.
He's, this is the pattern of
bending of the truth, or Steve Jobs used to talk about alternative reality.
So the startup fund thing was a much bigger deal to the board than I think was previously understood. So, the board found out at a party, someone overheard at a party, someone saying "Oh, OpenAI doesn't actually own the startup fund." And the board was like, "Wait, what? Tell us more." And it took months for them to get answers from Sam and the OpenAI executives about what is the status of this startup fund? And it turned out that, to do it quickly, Sam just spun it up himself because that's what he naturally does as an investor. And so he owned it personally and had, he'd been under oath in front of the Senate saying, "I own no equity in OpenAI." And so then they said, "Oh, well, he doesn't benefit financially, et cetera, kind of explained it away and changed it. But after a number of these things had happened, the board started to look back and they believed they saw a pattern of deliberate deception.
I think, Keach, one of the things that people outside Silicon Valley don't quite understand, especially critics like, I don't know, Bernie Sanders and AOC, is that these billionaires, they're not really driven by money. They don't really care about money. They have so much money, it makes no difference. Do you think that Sam, my sense with Altman, but you know a million times more than I do, you've sat down with him, you've written this book, is he doesn't really care about money.
I think that's right.
And if not, then what does he actually care about?
He wants to make world-changing technology. He wants to change the world. He wants to fix the world as much as he can. I mean, I do feel like his whole life, he has been told, and it's true, that he has special gifts, right? He's always been the smartest person in his class. He's always sort of been off the charts. So I think he feels like he has responsibility to. But
you're almost buying his narrative. I mean, is that... He just wants to make the world a better place. That's the standard Silicon Valley narrative that those charming, careless people at Facebook, Sheryl and Mark Zuckerberg told us they didn't really make the world a better place. Is he any different from a Zuckerberg or a Sandberg? Probably more of a Zuckerberg than a Sandberg.
Well, it's kind of interesting. He actually compares himself, I believe, directly to Zuckerberg at one point, because it is true that he doesn't have equity in OpenAI itself, outside of like a tiny bit through some YC fund. And that's a pretty crazy thing to do, right? To agree to not take any equity in a company you co-founded, because he's already so rich in other areas. So I do not. What separates him from Zuckerberg is he doesn't have super voting shares. He's not a king. He has to literally work just through persuasion and like personal relationships and this sort of network that he has created. And what's kind of wild to me is he had so much faith in that power that he had, that he accepted a thing where he had no equity in the company. He had no official power, right? He just had this sort of de facto power. And what was wild about the firing story is that the board came up against this de facto power of Sam's, which was kind of a whisper campaign to get rid of this board member that's kind of annoying, and tell somebody that somebody else said something about them to try to push this board member out. So it was this politicking that he had so much faith in his own ability to do that what allowed him to say, okay, I don't even need equity in the company.
I know that he was surprised by all this, but as the smoke clears from what happened, he came out of this much stronger than he went in. Now he's remains the CEO. He got rid of a lot of the people who were his enemies. Is it conceivable? I mean, in our age of conspiracy theories, I'm sure some people believe that Altman conspired to do this. Did he? Was he more in charge of the narrative than sometimes appears, or was he? Did he take advantage of circumstances that he hadn't made to benefit himself?
Well, okay. A lot of good things in that. First of all, I do not think that he did this on purpose. He legitimately was surprised, and it legitimately did hurt them. While it's true that he was then able to go and clean house, they are still to this day dealing with the aftershocks of this, because the company has been trying to go for profit kind of as a result of this. And it's been incredibly challenging because its partner, Microsoft, has a lot of leverage. And the sort of destabilizing effect of having your CEO removed for 5 days is part of what is making this.
And it took out. I mean, this was pre-Trump 2.0, so it dominated the headlines for weeks.
Oh yeah, it was crazy. So on one hand, like, no, I don't think that he wanted this to happen. However, his ability to command the narrative as soon as it did happen was striking, and really why he was back so quickly. And I've talked to so many people involved in this that were just like amazed at how quickly Sam and his allies set and shaped the narrative of what happened within hours. Within hours, he sort of fanned out to their group of fellow CEOs who were tweeting support for him, who were sort of whispering to other people what the real deal was, and that this was kind of a disgruntled employee and someone else mad about something else. And because the board was quiet and it never explained their own reasons, That was the narrative that held.
Perhaps in retrospect, the board should have gone to Elon Musk and said, "Can you come in instead?"
So there's an idea.
Yeah, I don't want to relitigate all that. Everyone needs to read the book and the articles. But where are we now, Keach, with OpenAI? It's a remarkably valuable company. I don't know what the latest valuation is, over $100 billion for a private company. Chat GPT is changing the world. They've raised huge amounts of money. Is Sam in charge? Firstly, is he really in charge of the company? Is he fully trusted? And secondly, have they resolved this profit, non-profit contradiction at the heart of the company, which is why the thing that Thiel warned him about?
So yes, Sam is really in charge, but no, they have not resolved that issue. They've been in negotiations to try to basically make this extremely weird company less weird. So they've been trying to make it a more normal for-profit or public benefit or something corporation, and they've been locked in really, really difficult negotiations about it. And so while it's true that Sam sort of won, he's still under enormous pressure, because right now the only way they can raise money is to say, okay, we're going to do this for-profit conversion, because what investor, having seen the dumpster fire of the firing, what investor would put in money without some assurances that's not going to happen again, and that they're going to have some kind of a seat at the table and a voice, which investors did not have during the firing. So they're basically saying, give us money, but if we can't go for profit in a year or two, you can have it back. So imagine the amount of pressure.
Yeah, and meanwhile, I saw a photo of Altman, who always looks so comfortable and happy with himself and confident. I saw a picture of him in a room with Donald Trump, and he looked very, very uncomfortable. Meanwhile, his biggest enemy, Elon Musk, is literally or perhaps metaphorically in bed with the president of the United States. So that doesn't help him either.
That's true. And the very first weeks after Donald Trump was reelected, it was looking really bad for Sam and OpenAI, right? I mean, they were on the wrong side of that political moment. But what was so fascinating is, this first full day of the Trump presidency, who is at the podium with the president but Sam Altman?
Yeah, there's a Zelig-like quality. I mean, if Woody Allen hadn't been disgraced, maybe he could play Sam Altman in the movie.
It's pretty strange. I mean, it's just hilarious that he managed to pop up and, without Elon's heads up. So he has his own power base, and he has this vision that he has sold the president that I think the president has bought, which is AI can be an engine of job growth, and it can be an engine of building and investment. And, Trump likes big numbers. So they announced a $500 billion investment with SoftBank and Oracle. And that's the kind of thing Trump likes to do. So it'll be interesting to watch their battle play out during this presidency.
I'm sure you will be. And it's more than interesting. And meanwhile, what about the product? I mean, now we have Google's Gemini. We have Musk's XAI, which he merged a few days ago with X. We have Anthropic, which I use, which I rather like. I do a weekly show with Keith Tier from That Was the Week, and Keith is still very bullish on the OpenAI technology. Are they still perhaps a step ahead of the rest of the market, or have the Anthropics and Geminis and XAIs, have they caught up?
I mean, they're still in the lead. ChatGPT is a very popular consumer product. And I'm not sure anyone really saw that coming, right? In the first days of the OpenAI revolution, the idea was, Microsoft is going to put it in its products and it's going to be some enterprise product, right? And that's not really what's happened. Yes, it's in those products, but the success has been as a consumer product. And who could have possibly guessed that OpenAI would become like a consumer product company? That just seems unimaginable when they were setting out as this lab. So yes, they are still ahead, but the distance is closing. And I think DeepSeek really shook everybody's confidence that this model of whoever has the most money wins might not be forever.
And then Altman's comments on AGI, how seriously should we take those? about the imminence of AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which is supposed to be the equivalent of human intelligence.
It's such a fascinating thing to watch because, of course, the dream of AGI was how he attracted all these researchers. But at a time that no one else believed in AGI, OpenAI was like, no, we believe in it. It's going to happen. If you want to come build it here, when it was considered a crazy thing. And increasingly, Sam has been saying it's about to happen. And, you can only say that for so long before your credibility is really tested. So I think it's entirely possible we'll see some announcement this year that will claim some element of it,
Yeah, and you've been very generous with your time. 2 more very quick questions, then I'll let you go, Keach. There is a childish quality to this. All these seem to be little boys running around with their bazookas. Are there any grown-ups here? You mentioned Google driving this and DeepMind. The way in which I think Parmi Olsen presents this conflict or this competition race between Altman and Demis Hassabis, she actually forecasts that Hassabis will eventually become CEO of Google, is that Hassabis is more of a grown-up. What's your take? And is the real race now perhaps ultimately between a Hassabis-led Google and an Altman-led OpenAI? I mean, Microsoft, of course, as always, have been left at the altar.
I do think that's a pretty smart prediction as to where it's going. But grown up is an interesting word, right? Because being inside Google proves to be very, very challenging for this technology. Because, of course, Google's business model is selling advertising. And OpenAI has built a consumer, like a subscription business, right? People are paying $20 or sometimes many hundreds of dollars to use this directly. That is a fundamentally different business than Google Gemini powering your search answers. And Google is hamstrung. They can't really fully roll it out because it will kill the golden goose that has been giving them all their search revenue. So
the innovator's dilemma.
There it is. There it is. So it's really hard to see how a company as giant as Google or Microsoft, despite all their enormous scientific power, is going to be able to navigate, as nimbly as some other company that isn't.
And maybe the reason why when you go on Chrome now, when you ask a question, Gemini comes up rather than traditional search. And finally, Keach, it's a remarkable story. You tell it so well, both in the book and in your Wall Street Journal pieces and in this conversation. I mean, you've done a lot of thinking about Sam Altman. You're obviously, to say the least, slightly skeptical. If OpenAI does indeed become the Microsoft or Google of our AI age, should we trust this guy? I mean, is he in any way trustworthy, or he seems so slippery? He tells people what they want to hear. He's a survivor. He's a brilliant salesman. But there's no moral spine there. There's no real conscience, is there?
My honest answer is that I think there is.
Well, I hope the answer is always honest.
But truly, I mean, just having met him and talked to him, I do think that there is a moral center. And I do actually think that he tries to do the right thing. And that a lot of this behavior that has freaked people out is not even conscious sometimes.
Yeah, but that's no defense. I mean, that's like saying someone's so addicted to stealing that they can't help themselves. Or telling lies.
There's absolutely a dimension of Sam where he will tell you what you want to hear. For example, let's say on the copyright issue, right? For what OpenAI.
Yeah, you began with the problems of stealing the data that drives the intelligence of ChatGPT.
Right. So, for example, Sam's line is, we think creators should be paid for their content, and there should be some model out there that pays creators when we train on their content. If only there were. But in practice, of course, the company did take all kinds of material without permission, and
they stole it. In other words,
And most recently, both Google and OpenAI have put forth comments for the government because the Trump administration is basically trying to ask, like, what should we do with AI? And they put forth comments that said, you should say that training on copyrighted material is fair use, which is, first of all, kind of a wild thing because it's not really for the executive branch to say that. But the fact that they felt like they needed to ask for it tells you a little bit of something about what the law might be. So that's all to say that look what they do, not what they say.
Well, maybe nothing really changes in Silicon Valley. You still have these characters like Sam Altman. You still have the issues over OpenAI. Maybe ChatGPT is another version of Napster. We shall see. Keach, Hagey, thank you so much. You've been really wonderful. I've taken advantage of your time. But your new book on the great, or perhaps not so great, Sam Altman, The Optimist, will be out in May. But everyone should order it now and read all your stuff in the journal. You have become the world's authority on Sam Altman. Thank you so much.
Thank you.